Our gathering here tonight is sponsored by Mindy and Chaim Klein. It's to commemorate the yahrzeit of Mindy's mother, Isabel Schwartz, Chaya Bat Ben Zion, and Mindel. So we do thank you for the sponsorship. And Neshama should have now Leah. We should hear indeed good things. With everyone. And I thank everyone for joining. It should be an enjoyable holiday. It's a time that we try to find those moments where we could meditate a little bit about what this Yom Tov is about. It's a time for celebration. And hopefully we are able to achieve that. Now, so obviously when a rabbi gets up and shares thoughts, feelings, words of Torah, they reflect on the personality of that rabbi. So sometimes you could analyze rabbis based on their divrei Torah. It says a lot about a person. Now, if it's someone that is always just quoting from others, that too could indicate, because if he is quoting specific authorities, it means he relates to the way those authorities think. So I think I could admit to you that I often gravitate towards stories where we address the fact that we, the people of Israel, could have an impact on the world. Okay, and it's not just stories that I share, often divrei Torah, many divrei Torah that we have the opportunity to study together, to discuss, travel on that theme of we are here to have an impact on the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu placed us on this planet to be a light upon the nations, to have an impact. Obviously, we cannot achieve it if we don't focus on our responsibility. But nevertheless, it is something that we could be proud of when we hear of such stories. So I gravitate towards such stories. And I could give you an example of one of the many stories. The one I'm going to be sharing now, I don't think I've shared in the past, but it's a traditional one that I enjoy sharing because it talks about how special the Jewish person is, that there's something special about Klal Yisrael, and positive stories about the Jewish person concerned about others. Talk to me. So here's my traditional story. So there was a family in Lithuania towards the end of the 19th century that was struggling financially, landed up in the United States, like so many did between the 1880s and the 1920s. But even in the Golden Medina, even in the United States, struggled. And when we say struggle, it does not mean that they couldn't purchase all the different flavors of macaroons for Pesach. When we say struggle, this is basically, we're dealing with actual survival. So Mr. Karnowski learns from a relative that there's an opportunity for a shmata rag jar business down in New Orleans. So the family with the Karnowski children traveled to New Orleans, and he's a peddler going from neighborhood to neighborhood with shmatas and with bottles to put together some money to feed his family. Now, next to the Karnowskis, there was a family, an African-American family, or blacks, same thing. And they had a son. They had a son. The name of the son was Louis. And although the Karnofskis struggled, Louis and his family struggled even more. So the Karnofsky children and Mr. Karnofsky were kind to the child. And eventually, on days when the children would join on making the rounds throughout the different wards of New Orleans to sell shmatas and bottles, they took little Louis with them. And he would go on the wagon. And Mr. Karnofsky at some point took a whistle and handed the whistle to Louis and says, Louis, when we get to a neighborhood, do you think you could blow the whistle that people will know we're here and they'll come out to purchase the goods? So Louis picks up his whistle, and it seems like he has good lungs, the little child, the 7-year-old had, and he was blowing his whistle. And he took pride in the fact that he knows how to blow a whistle. At home, wasn't getting too much encouragement, but Mr. Karnofsky was very warm to Louis, very kind to him, and made Louis feel good. Mr. Karnofsky would say to Louis, you know, you're good with a whistle, you would probably be good with a musical instrument. And he planted a seed in Louis's mind, little Louis. And one day they're traveling by a store, and they actually, this is a few years later, and they actually, traveling together, they saw a trumpet. And Louis says to Mr. Karnofsky, you know, you mentioned that one day perhaps I could upgrade, and you see within me talent for a musical instrument. How about if maybe one day I could get that trumpet? Supposedly it cost like $12, and there was no way that little Louis or his family could afford it. But Mr. Karnofsky had a good heart, and he said, you know what, if you commit to join me for the next year, blowing the whistle throughout the neighborhoods, you can have the trumpet. And little Louis got a trumpet. And he was actually good with it. He knew how to blow a trumpet. I don't know exactly what it takes, but my stomach, good lips, good lungs. Maybe someone could tell me it's a little bit like blowing a shofar, but little Louis is blowing his trumpet. And at some point, someone spotted little Louis and realized that he has some talent. And there was some gathering, I think in a school, and he blew the trumpet. And he was good. And he had an ear for music. And within a couple of years, he actually got a gig in New Orleans. And Louis became well known in town. And he always had a soft spot, not just for Mr. Karnofsky and his family, but for the Jewish faith. Because he started wearing, Louis wore a Star of David on his chest for the rest of his life. And he ate matzah. He ate matzah on Pesach. He felt connected to the Karnofskis. He needs to eat their food. And even though he was a successful trumpeter and musician in New Orleans, he continued with those traditions. And there are even those who claim that he had a mezuzah. Now, Louis moves on, eventually moves to Chicago, and he becomes well known not just in these cities of jazz, but throughout the world, because I think many of us have heard of Louis Armstrong. And it's a cute story, because here's a well-known personality, and under his shirts, on a necklace, there's a reminder that, you know what, a Jewish person was kind to a child. Why? Because that's what Judaism is about. It's about concern. And it's not so far-fetched that the Jew needs to be concerned, because we recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nosen lechem lechol basar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is concerned for the welfare of the planet and for humanity. And so too, Mr. Karnofsky. Now that's what I would call a typical story, the Jew having an impact on the world. But today I would like to focus on something else before we say Yizkor. And I think for many of us, The Yizkor we're going to be saying, if it is tonight or if it's Shabbos, the Yizkor is for someone that preserved something very special, our tradition, or we are here today, or we have an awareness today about what Yiddishkeit, what Judaism, what Torah, a Torah life is about, because of that person. And with that in mind, I would like to share a verse that appears in Shir HaShirim, the song we're going to be reading on Shabbos. And this verse is a reminder, but at the same time, it's also a verse that's telling us, you know what? If there are those who preserve Judaism, and again, not just the Judaism that has an impact on the world, but even a Judaism that just preserves it from within, let's remember them. Let's be appreciative to them. And let's do good things, like giving tzedakah, like the study of Torah, like a commitment to our tradition, because they merit from those things even today. The verse in Shir HaShirim, now, you know, Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, it's text that the rabbis call Kodesh Kodashim, extremely holy, because it's a love song. And the people of Israel have a relationship with their creator, which is a very deep relationship. And yeah, there's love. Kodesh Baruch Hu loves us. We love HaKodesh Baruch Hu. It's a mitzvah. And there are a lot of messages there, very important ones. And the one we're going to focus on is the following. In verse 6 of the first chapter, we are told, B'nei imi, the children of my mother, nicharu bi, they were critical of me. And samuni, you know what they did with me? You know what the children of my mother did with me? They made me a notara et hakeramim. They made me a keeper of vineyards, in the plural. The problem is, the verse tells us, karmi sheli lo natarti, but my own vineyard I did not protect. I did not do what I'm supposed to do with my own vineyard. What is this verse referring to? So many commentators tell us that the B'nei Imi, the children of my mother here, is talking about the nations of the world. And they made me, unfortunately, watch over vineyards in the plural. What are the vineyards in the plural? Idolatry. And that was due to the fact that I did not fulfill my responsibility. I did not guard my own vineyard. Okay, that's an explanation that's given. Comes the head of the Volozhin Yeshiva of Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, and he says, let me tell you the real message here. You know, a mother is one that is supposed to teach us menschlichkeit, how to be a decent person, right? Sometimes we're told when we don't act the way we should, did your mother never tell you you're not supposed to say that? That's what a mother is supposed to do. Menschlichkeit, derech eretz, interacting in a decent way is a good thing. And sometimes the nations of the world look at the people of Israel and they tell us, you know what, you should act the way your mother taught you. Be a decent person, interact with decency, follow the norms of the world, follow the derech eretz, be a decent human being. B'nei imi, the children of my mother. In other words, the ones who follow rational thinking, to act with derech eretz, to act with decency, They were the ones who were critical of me and turned to me and say, expand yourself, be a good human being, be concerned about what the world is concerned. And if the world is concerned about human rights, you be a mensch, be concerned about human rights. If the world is concerned about global warming, the Jew should be concerned about global warming, right? Be a decent person. Follow the teachings of the mother. Comes the Netziv and says, that's not bad, by the way. It's not a terrible thing to be concerned, to be decent, to act like ethical human beings do. But the problem is, Karmi Shali, our own vineyard, those things that are Jewish, and they are very personal for us, the Jewish people. Torah, right? Tradition, Torah mitzvos, masores. Those things, unfortunately, lo shamarti. In other words, to go ahead and talk about these universal values, where we are encouraged, by others, by Bnei Imi to follow, when we are encouraged to follow them, and we ignore our kerem, our own vineyards, that is what brings about destruction. The Jewish person could talk, and there could be lessons about impacting humanity and relating to humanity. These are all good messages, as long as Karmi Shali Natarti, as long as I am watching over my own vineyard. If I'm a Torah Jew, and I stick to tradition, and even to those things that perhaps I don't understand, and I value the study of Torah, and I value the mitzvos ben adam lechavero, and I value tefillah, and I value a shul, and I value organizations of tzedakah, and I value organizations where there's a commitment to the study of Torah. And then in addition, I want to have an impact on the world. Beautiful, that's great. What's the problem? When the Jew becomes a notai takramim, when we talk about tikkun olam, and we talk about building houses for people in Africa and providing fresh water, and ignore what our tradition talks about, karmi shali lo natarti, that's a tragedy. That's when there's trouble. So this is my message today, that let's remember our responsibility to our own tradition. Let's remember those who instilled within us an appreciation, and with their own life and with their own actions inspired us to value our tradition, because the Jewish people's impact on the world would not exist if there weren't those who commit to watching over our own vineyard. And it's an amazing vineyard, right? Not every person has to be doing the same work in a vineyard. You have to identify what your talents are, what your abilities are. If there are those who are gifted with being osek b'tzarkei tzibur, that's the greatest mitzvah, that they can go ahead and commit themselves to Klal Yisrael. If there are those who have an appreciation to the depth of Torah, study Torah. For every person, there's a different job in the vineyard, but commit yourself to your vineyard. That's the message we have. And that's really what we could do here today as we are going through the Yizkor experience. It's a time to remember. Remember people that often went through difficulty to be able to preserve the vineyard. People that went through struggles, and it was a generation, for many of us, it's a generation of difficulty. And yet there's continuity. It's because they watched over our kerem, our vineyard. And we're here today. And we obviously have a responsibility to the future. We have a responsibility to the future of Torah mitzvos. And hopefully we do our part for continuity. It is beautiful to talk about the Karnofskis, and they clearly sanctify the name of God, but let's balance it with an understanding of the value of our vineyard, and let's do our part to continue preserving it. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and say the three molas.